7 rounds and 7 wide receivers you should have an eye on for your New Orleans Saints, and some HBCU offensive prospects to keep an eye out on throughout the draft season. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that we are free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter. USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today we're going to go through rounds 1 through 7 of the NFL draft and identify one wide receiver in each round that you should have an eye on for your New Orleans Saints. The guys that can come in rounds 1 through 7 and either have an immediate impact or potentially develop into impact players. And we're going to be joined by Locked On HBCU host Darrion Gray to talk about some of the HBCU, historically black colleges and universities, and their prospects that could come into the NFL and potentially be targets for the Saints in this year's draft. So I want to start off here in round 1. We're going to hit rounds 1 through 4, and then we're going to talk rounds 5, 6, and 7. Or actually, we'll do rounds 1 through 3, and then 4, 5, 6, and 7 as we get into the second part of our show. So let's start off with a guy that we all know that I was going to talk about here. Of course, I had to put him here. But Chris Olave, round 1, right? And you can pick any round 1 wide receiver you want. All of them will have an immediate impact on the New Orleans Saints. Chris Olave, Treylon Burks, you could say Drake London potentially if that's one of your guys. Even a Jahan Dotson out of Penn State could potentially be somebody that can go in the first round, and that would have some value for the New Orleans Saints. So what we're going to do is we go through all these. I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of them. I'm going to give you their RAS scores, what it is that they've done, and we're going to talk about the roles specifically that they fill as well, because these are 7 different receivers and therefore 7 different roles that they could fill. So we'll start off with Ohio State wide receiver Chris Olave in round 1, 6 foot, even 187 pounds, caught 65 passes for 936 yards and 13 touchdowns in 2021. That was along with Garrett Wilson as well as Jackson Smith-Njigba in a phenomenal 3-headed attack that actually pushed Jameson Williams out of Ohio State. That's one of the reasons why he ended up transferring to Alabama, is because of those 3 receivers being there. Chris Olave, despite the fact that he had those other 2 guys still going for 13 touchdowns, 10 plus, and nearly 1,000 receiving yards. His RAS score comes in below the 9.00 threshold that we tend to pair with the Saints. The fact of the matter is that they don't look at RAS scores, right? They have their own athletics sort of provisions in their own athletics formulas that they use that yield similar results to RAS. So to just give us another piece here, I'm also using our good friend Ryan Tracy from over at Locked On NFL Drafts Athletic Matrix, which measures a lot of things, including how somebody is able to generate speed, generate explosion in short area situations versus long situations, how they're able to do it through contact, all of this. So 94.75 puts him at about 13th in this year's class. So he's below the average starter in the NFL right now, but he's well above the 7-year average of wide receivers over the course of the past 7 drafts. So that gives you an idea of where he sits amongst the rest of the draft class, but also sort of relative to what the NFL produces in terms of starters, all of this. We all got really excited about Chris Olave, thought he ran a 4.2 ran in the 4.2 range during the NFL draft, or the combine rather, but then that was adjusted, but still just below a 4.4, still very respectable time and really good for his draft stock. So will it be around at 18? Kind of depends on what it is that teams decide is most valuable or most important to them, but with the trenches supposedly set to dominate the top 12 in this year's draft, it's good news for the New Orleans Saints, and the role that Chris Olave would serve would be a do-it-all route runner, right? He's somebody that can stretch and push the ball downfield, stretch defenses vertically, but he can also run routes really well, win on breaking routes, create separation in that way, win over the middle of the field, although his usage was mostly down those sidelines, so that's where you'd like to see him. Okay, let's get to round 2. Round 2, I went with Georgia wide receiver George Pickens. I've talked about George Pickens a couple of times, but there's a lot of things to like about him. 6'3", 195 pounds, ran in that 4.4 range. 2019, though, was his last full year of football, his only full year of football. 49 catches, 729 yards, 8 touchdowns. Really good numbers, but he only had 5 catches last season because he was injured, but he came back just in time to help Georgia win the national championship. He ranked highly on RAS, the relative athletic score that bunches together size grades, explosion grades, agility grades, and speed grades to give you a composite score that ranks all these players. 9.33. Generally, anything over a 9 is good, right? Or great, and then even steps into elite in some cases. We'll get to an elite prospect here in just a moment. But gives you an idea of where George Pickens ranks there. He's well above Chris Olave, who is at that 8.63. He's at 9.33, but he's below in the athletics matrix at 93.18. What would his role be? That puts him in a situation to where he is basically a physical field stretcher. I mean, he can push the ball downfield. He can do all of that, but he is physical. I mean, and he loves it. He loves to block. He loves being all that. So that's something that keeps you on the field as well, right? As opposed to individual sort of responsibilities that you get plugged into as a specialist, that keeps you on the field. So when you talk about a guy that could take a lot of snaps as a Z receiver or a second receiver opposite Michael Thomas, because of his blocking prowess, as well as his ability to be a good hands catcher, to be a good technical route runner, and to be able to win in routes physically as well. He does a very good job of stacking defensive backs, all of that. It gets you on the field and it keeps you on the field. So if you're looking for an immediate impact player, you want somebody that could do a little bit of everything, George Pickens absolutely does that for you. And so does this player that I continue to see as a round 3 grade. Could potentially go higher, but let's just do it so we can have the conversation around him. Cincinnati wide receiver Alec Pierce. And his role, simple. He's a playmaker. You need him for 3 yards on a slant, he'll get you 3 yards on a slant. You want him to push the ball, stack, and separate downfield, he'll do that for you. You want him to win a 50-50 ball, he'll do that for you too. 6'3", 211 pounds, a 9.8 RAS score in terms of relative athletic score there. That puts him in the elite range. And he's also up there in Ryan's athletic matrix as well with a 98.57, one of the top 5 in this wide receiver class. 57 catches, 884 yards, and 8 touchdowns in Cincinnati in 2021. He is a phenomenal prospect, a very, very good prospect. And I tend to be a little hesitant around big guys that do big guy things unless they can show you something else. That's what I missed in T. Higgins. He showed me something else, but I still wrote him off as a big guy that does big guy things. Alec Pierce, big guy that does big guy things, but he shows you everything else as well. You want him to win his reps, he will win his reps. And that's exactly what you're looking for as an immediate impact guy in round 2 or round 3. In the second day, Alec Pierce, phenomenal prospect to keep an eye out on. It would be a huge win for the New Orleans Saints, particularly if you can grab him in the 3rd round or even late in the 2nd round. All right, so that gets us through day 1 and 2 prospects. Next, we're going to get to some big-time field stretchers that nobody's talking about that the Saints could potentially land in day 3, including my diamond in the rough wide receiver in this year's draft. We'll get to that here in just a moment, but first, it is tournament time. The college basketball tournament continues to roll along. The Final Four is now set. Who's going to move ahead? Who's going to win the championship? What's going to happen? You can get in on all of that action over at Bet Online. Our good friends and our exclusive online betting partners have you covered with everything that you need around the sports betting world, including news, analysis, and podcasts to help you keep up to date on all the latest trends. And of course, they have your favorite Vegas casino games. And if you don't want to bet on basketball, there's boxing, UFC, MMA, baseball around the corner, hockey, whole bunch of stuff for you to get involved in. And of course, the NBA, if you'd rather bet on pro basketball as opposed to college basketball. Hope somebody won some money on some live betting trends with the Pelicans overcoming a 23-point deficit from the Los Angeles Lakers for a big-time win on Saturday. So that was super dope as well, or rather this weekend. So ton of great stuff for you to check out over at Bet Online. Go and check them out right now. They are the online sportsbook experts where the game starts. All right, family, getting into day 3 of the wide receiver breakdown, going round by round. We appreciate you, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to check out that Locked On NFL YouTube page and Locked On NFL podcast as well. Don't forget, we're going to be live for all 3 days of the draft. I'll be there too, so you can watch that live over on the Locked On NFL YouTube page. Make sure you go and subscribe today. So we went through rounds 1, 2, 3. It gets us through days 1 and 2 of impact wide receivers that the New Orleans Saints could invest in each round. Now we're working our way through rounds 4 through 7, day 3. So we'll kind of fly through these a little bit quicker, but I'm going to give you all the same information, right? Height, weight, RAS score, athletic matrix, which measures a little bit more about functional athleticism. So it just kind of gives you an idea. The higher the number, the basically better they operate specifically within the routes that they're actually asked to run in the NFL, the change of direction, speeds and acceleration and explosion, things like that that you really want to see and need from wide receivers as opposed to just the straight line speed kind of stuff. And then we'll also talk through how they contributed, or when they were able to contribute most, how they contributed to their former college team. So round 4, guy that we've talked about a little bit, Velus Jones Jr., wide receiver from Tennessee. Of course, there's the Tennessee wide receiver connection now. So I wanted to make sure that I highlighted Velus Jones Jr. a little bit. 62 catches, 807 yards, and 7 touchdowns with the Tennessee Volunteers last year. He also averaged over 27 yards per return in the kick return game as well. So he has a little bit of special teams ability. We're getting into day 3 here. Special teams day. These guys that can contribute, just like we talked about George Pickens, who can kind of do many things and get on the field because he can stretch the field. He's a good hands catcher. He's a secure ball carrier, all that, but he's also a really good blocker. Same thing with these day 3 guys. Doesn't necessarily have to be a good blocker, but if they can do something on special teams and in the kicking game, then that helps a ton. He's a little bit underneath the threshold for height for the New Orleans Saints, but we have to see how the threshold holds up without Sean Payton. 5'11", but he crosses the weight threshold at 204 pounds. He has a 9.05 RAS score, so just above that 9.00 threshold that a lot of fans look for. And then for the athletic matrix, he comes in at 96.35, which puts him up above both, actually, Georgia wide receiver George Pickens, as well as Ohio State wide receiver in Chris Olave. And part of that is his speed, ran into 4.3s. All that good stuff. So you want to look at his role and what it is that he would be able to potentially do for you fitting into the New Orleans Saints offense. I think you look at him as a slot receiver first, really good short area quickness. You look at him being at the top when it comes to short area athleticism in the athletics matrix. Those things tend to favor slot receivers who are working in tighter spaces, that are running routes from inside out as opposed to outside in, things like that. And then you can see him as a potential Z project, right? You could start him off in the slot and then help him grow into a Z receiver because of that deep speed, and then be able to use him in both places if he can excel in that. And then, of course, I just want to highlight again that return ability, that special teams ability. I know I love so much when it comes to players on the third day, as do the New Orleans Saints. Okay, now let's get to somebody I've never talked about before. Rutgers wide receiver Bo Melton, okay? 5'11", 189 pounds, well below thresholds for the New Orleans Saints in both categories. Well, slightly below in terms of height, but then he hits you with the 189 pounds, which is well below that 200-pound threshold. So why would I say, hey, this is a guy to pay attention to? Well, one of the reasons is simple, right? You're not looking at a guy like Bo Melton as a starter and as a full-time player. So now we're getting into the kind of range of like double dipping, right? You've invested in a wide receiver early. Now you're looking to come back at the position in rounds 5, 6, or 7 to potentially find another option. And by the way, yes, I know the Saints don't have a 6th round pick, but they could trade into the 6th round, things like that. Okay, so with Bo Melton, the thing that I like so much about him is that he is a yards after catch guy, kind of like a Wan'Dale Robinson. You could probably throw Treylon Burks in there as well. Treylon Burks does it a little bit differently, but Bo Melton with the ball in his hands, pretty outstanding stuff. And so he had 618 receiving yards in 2021, according to Pro Football Focus. Over 50% of that came after the catch. That's exactly what you want to see. 55 catches, 618 yards, only 3 touchdowns, however. And like I mentioned, he came in under those thresholds at 5'11", 189 pounds. RAS score of 9.2, so he's above that threshold. And when it comes to the athletics matrix, he's pretty well up there as well. When you look at the wide receivers, he kind of nestles in. I want to give you like a ranking for where he sits in this one. So he kind of sits right below the starter average across the NFL right now. So he sits with a 96.57. So it puts him 6th within this NFL draft class, just below guys like Isaiah Winston, who blew up the combine, Tyquan Thornton, who of course ran the fastest time at the combine, and then the guys that we're going to be talking about in a little bit that I don't want to spoil. He's also a little bit under like Christian Watson, for instance, who would be a 1st or 2nd round prospect. So what's the role that a guy like Bo Melton serves you? He's a gadget guy. That's what he would be. He would be a gadget player for you. He'd be somebody that doesn't come on all 3 downs, but might be somebody that you use in special situations. Maybe like a 2nd and 2 from beyond the 50-yard line, maybe 40 yards from the end zone, and you want to create a shot look, but you actually want to dump the ball underneath and let somebody with some yards after catch or run after catch ability create. That's Bo Melton's role. So that's something that I would look for him in. You could even line him up in the backfield, run him out from routes there, stuff like that. He kind of matches Kawaan Baker in that way as well. Like Kawaan Baker was really good in college, who the Saints drafted last year in the 7th round with the ball in his hand because of his physicality. Bo Melton, a little bit more natural in terms of his elusiveness. You know what I'm saying. All right, round 6. Okay, this is a guy I was very excited to talk about. Jalen Nailor, wide receiver out of Michigan State. Again, comes under some thresholds, but we're in day 6 now. We're looking at traits. We're looking at roles. We're looking at things like that. So I'm not too upset about it. 5'11", so under the height threshold, 186 pounds under the weight threshold, and then the RAS score of 7.99. Now, of course, we've seen the Saints draft players who do not cross the 9.0 threshold for RAS, right? Some key players that they've drafted that don't cross that threshold. So it's okay, but he does come under the threshold that we look at. 96.25 when it comes to his athleticism, so he is up there when it comes to where he ranks within this draft class. So 37 catches, 695 yards, and 6 touchdowns with the Michigan State Spartans. He was their big play machine. That's where they utilized him, and that's what he did. So you look at the role that he could potentially serve with the New Orleans Saints, call him a big play specialist. He's a guy that you would put out on that same situation we just talked about when it came to Bo Melton, to where you've got like a 2nd and 2 on the opponent's 40-yard line. You're driving, you're in their territory. Well, then you bring in a guy like Jalen Nailor and say, beat the guy in front of you in that one-on-one coverage that you're going to get, because Michael Thomas is going to draw the double team and the safety help over the top. So if we can get that cover 1 look, you need to win on your side of the field with your speed and with your ability to stack. And that is something that Jalen Nailor would be able to bring to you. So his role would be specialized. He would be like the 4th, 5th, or 6th wide receiver on the roster, and then you would utilize him in those specialized moments. You're not talking about a starter here. You're talking about a guy that you can use as a specialist. Same thing here as we wrap up our list, round 7, but this is my diamond in the rough at wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints, or really for this entire draft class. Notre Dame wide receiver Kevin Austin Jr. Let me just read a couple of things to you real quick. 6'2", 200 pounds. Thumbs up, thumbs up. RAS score of 9.93. Big time thumbs up. The 3rd highest wide receiver in Ryan Tracy's athletics matrix at 97.28. And he has a 4.3 40, 39-inch vert, and 11-foot broad jump. Not a lot of guys that are 6'2", 200 pounds are running that or jumping that or leaping that. So why is he a 7th round prospect? He's missed a lot of time. Unavailability. He missed his 2019 season because of a suspension. It was a suspension for marijuana, weed, something that's not as big a deal in the NFL now as it used to be. And then he also had 2 separate foot injuries that have sidelined him for separate seasons as well. But in 2021, he got to play the majority of games, 48 catches, 888 yards, 7 touchdowns. His role would be a low-risk, developmental Z receiver. That's exactly the role he would be able to serve as a 6'2", 200-pound guy that runs in the 4.3s, has a 39-inch vert, is able to win downfield, all of that. You don't necessarily look at him as being a guy that you draft and then hope can immediately get out onto the field. But if you've taken an early wide receiver and you're looking to double up at the end on potential, low-risk potential in the 7th round, Kevin Austin Jr. is your guy. He could even go undrafted because of his unavailability. And so I look at him as the diamond in the rough of this year's wide receiver draft class, as long as the foot injury can hold up, or foot injuries can hold up, and as long as he ends up in a system that will utilize his skill set and allow him to develop, and he doesn't end up on a long-term development track, Kevin Austin Jr. is the guy whose name you might hear sooner rather than later. All right, y'all, that was 7 rounds, 7 wide receivers that could have an immediate or develop into impact players for the New Orleans Saints at the wide receiver position. I love doing this around draft season. We're going to do this for several positions of interest, as our good friend Darrion Gray of Locked On HBCU would call them. And he's going to join us here in just a second, because there were zero goose egg HBCU players taken in the NFL draft last year. That will change in 2022. And the New Orleans Saints are one of the teams that could potentially look even at a position you don't expect, like quarterback, for HBCU prospects. And Darrion's going to give us those names and players as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. But before Darrion calls us, I want to tell you about our friends over at rockauto.com and remind you about them, because they are absolutely phenomenal and fantastic, and we love them so much. Rock Auto is one of my favorite websites to go to anytime that I need something for a car, vehicle, whatever it is. I have friends that say, hey, I need, just kind of like talking, we talk cars and stuff like that. And so every now and then somebody will say something, I need like new windshield wipers. And I'm like, don't even go to the store, bro. Just like order it on rockauto.com, have it sent directly to your door. You don't got to worry about nothing. You don't got to go look at anybody. You ain't got to talk to anybody. You don't have to get up and go anywhere. You ain't got to worry about all that. No middlemen, nothing like that. You go to rockauto.com, let them know your make, model, year of your car, what it is that you're looking for, and they'll send it directly to your door. And look, they're a family business too. They've been helping auto parts customers online for over 20 years. So it's always great to support those family businesses, those small businesses as well. So go and check them out over at rockauto.com. Don't forget to let them know that Locked On sent you. We're writing Locked On in the How'd You Hear About Us section as you're excitedly checking out so that you can get all of your parts, needs, everything you need for your car right away. I get a little excited when I go to that website for sure. It's rockauto.com. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode with our good friend Darrion Gray at South Exclusives on Twitter from the Locked On HBCU podcast, talking about HBCU prospects that the NFL will be looking to invest in, but some that would fit the New Orleans Saints as well, including one that could push Cesar Ruiz sooner rather than later. Here we go. A whole lot of conversation around potentially drafting quarterbacks. I know a lot of people like the idea of like a Kenny Pickett or a Malik Willis, should he be available at 18 under some like crazy circumstances and things like that. But there's an HBCU quarterback that a team like the Saints could potentially invest in later rounds and just kind of see what they have in them, right?
Yeah, it's Aqeel Glass out of Alabama A&M. And I think he's a really good pick for the Saints in a couple of fronts. But let's first detail what he's accomplished, because there isn't maybe but 5 HBCU football conversations that you'll have where Aqeel Glass does not come up. And it's not simply because he's a quarterback. It's because he's one of the most decorated quarterbacks in FCS history. So I'm not just talking about SWAC, MEAC, CIAA, SEAC. I'm not just talking about those conferences. He is one of the most decorated quarterbacks, the most important position on the field. He's one of the most decorated guys in FCS history. So he definitely has that in his belt. Now, how does that fit into the New Orleans Saints? Because Jameis Winston just came in, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we've seen the contract. And personally, I'll tell you this. I'm an advocate for Jameis. I believe that Jameis can be the future quarterback of the Saints. However, that contract that they gave him says that they're not sure. It doesn't mean that he won't be. It means that they are not sure. And I mean, who can blame them? When you look at his sample size from last year, it was 7 games, I believe. So it wasn't a large sample size. It's something you would want to see more of. And that's one of the reasons that I believe you need to spend the first half of the draft investing in Jameis Winston. Michael Thomas is going to be back. We hope Michael Thomas is Michael Thomas, but he might not be. You need to invest in a wide receiver, possibly invest in an offensive lineman. We'll get into that in a little bit. You need to invest in some weapons, possibly a running back. There are 5 major holes or positions of interest. I'll call them positions of interest for the New Orleans Saints. And I think 4 of them are on the offensive side of the ball. So I think that offense is going to be major. So with that being said, if you're going to invest in a quarterback, which you should continue to do as long as you don't have your franchise guy, but drafting Aqeel Glass allows you to have a guy with some upside, a guy who might need a little bit of a year anyway, to be able to sit back, sit behind Jameis, and compete for that backup quarterback position. That's all it gives you a guy with the upside.
Yeah, and there's a reality in which you draft a guy like Aqeel Glass, and you maybe instead of getting, maybe you don't get your future franchise quarterback, but you get a 5 to 10 year backup quarterback that that knows the system, that loves the system, that is a part of what the other quarterbacks are working on. Like, he still becomes a potential glue guy within that quarterback room for whoever the future quarterbacks are. Of course, Darrion, you cover the New Orleans Saints. You have the Mouth of the South podcast. You've got all these other things as well, in addition to your HBCU coverage. So you understand what it is that New Orleans Saints always value. They value the guy that's on the field, and they value the guy that's on the sideline with the clipboard that's there to talk to you about what went right or what went wrong while they're on the field, right?
Yeah, always have. And I think that Glass has a perfect shot to at worst be that guy. I think that I think it was 2 years ago. It was about 2 years ago, and I was reading this article on the Undefeated Now Anscape, and they were talking about the black quarterback, and they were talking about how Geno Smith is so important to the black quarterback because it's finally a black quarterback who is a career backup. And that sounds kind of backwards, but for so long, it was either you had to be the star or you were gone.
Or you were nothing.
Either you were Michael Vick or you were done.
Right.
And there was no room to be in that middle where you could be a career backup and continuously get a check. I've seen Josh McCown be a career backup all the way into almost being a head coach. So being a career backup is very valuable. And I think that Glass, that would be very important to have that same development as black quarterbacks into the HBCU quarterback as well.
That's a phenomenal perspective. Let's turn the page on quarterback. We're talking about, how these guys can potentially fit in with the New Orleans Saints, a spot where the Saints could probably use a ton of help, or the guys in front of the quarterback. What about that offensive line? Anybody stand out for you there?
Yeah, there's one guy out of Southern University, Ja'Tyre Carter, and I think he has exactly what the Saints value: athleticism and versatility. I thought John Sigler of Saints Wire had a phenomenal point in talking about, well, everybody says have James Hurst and Ramczyk kind of holding over at the tackle positions, but why not draft a tackle, get a tackle, and have James Hurst push Ruiz? Now, I use that same logic, but I apply it to Carter, who has experience as a left tackle. He had the best pass grade in the FCS, pass block grade, but then also at the Senior Bowl, he showed the ability to flip sides. So either you can have him learning to maybe be the right tackle behind Hurst, if that's the case, but then you could also have him be a guy who pushes Ruiz at guard.
On the interior.
Athletic profile is actually maximized as a guard because he's way more athletic. And as Logan Hall from Houston about who he is, because at the Senior Bowl, they had a bunch of one-on-one reps and Carter. That was a very good battle at the Senior Bowl, and he did it all at guard. A lot of people project him to be a guard, but he has the versatility where even if he's your backup, he's your swing lineman, right? Clemente, Hurst, Carter. He has the ability to fill in and fill a spot at whether that's guard or at tackle. So that's why I think Carter, Ja'Tyre Carter, that's JA''Tyre Carter out of Southern University. I think he'll be a really good fit schematically for the Saints.
It's a really interesting way to go. And I think, you can have this situation out where you go from one very successful HBCU offensive lineman to maybe carving the way for another successful HBCU offensive lineman. Of course, Teron Armstead, who just got a huge contract with the Miami Dolphins, a former HBCU football player himself from the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. I know you did a feature on him over on Locked On HBCU. Just with a little bit of time that we have left, the other couple of offensive players that you're keeping an eye out on for the New Orleans Saints when it comes to these HBCU prospects.
Shamar Bridges out of Fort Valley State. He's a D2 guy who I think is a big receiver who can really stretch the field, along with Joshua Wilkes, who has been labeled by the UAPB announce team as the greatest deep threat in that school's history. So that tells you just two guys who can stretch the field. But if you just want some big bodies, maybe some intermediate guys, then you have Keith Corbin out of Jackson State, who has also done it at Houston. And you also have Marquise McLean. And the beautiful part about all of this is the Saints were able to see these guys at the HBCU Legacy Bowl. And the very last person I'm going to bring up is Jah-Maine Martin.
Yeah, so I was hoping he was going to come up.
The Saints, in my opinion, have one guy who isn't getting caught, and that's Deontay Hardy. No disrespect to anybody else, they could get caught. I've been wanting for years for somebody who when they're in the open field, I don't feel like they're getting caught. That's Jah-Maine Martin. He's a guy who's a one-cut runner who has speed for days, and somebody who I think could really help regardless of the Alvin Kamara situation. You're going to need another running back in here. I think Martin would be really good. I think he might be a late round draft pick. I think he might even sneak into the draft as well.
All right, family. One more big thank you to Darrion Gray at South Exclusives on Twitter, host of the Locked On HBCU podcast. Y'all go check that podcast out. Support the HBCU coverage and media that's out there. Darrion doing a phenomenal job over at the show. Just talked about Teron Armstead not too long ago as well, who, of course, was an HBCU alum, or is an HBCU alum. He's going to join us again later on in the week to talk defense. We're going to talk about my favorite draft prospect coming out of an HBCU as well. So we have a lot of that coming up for you. And tomorrow we're going to be joined by Austin Gale of PFF to talk a little bit more Pro Football Focus, talk a little bit more about what the Saints needs and where they could potentially go heading into the draft, as well as throughout the rest of free agency. Have the Saints done what they needed to do? Can they do what they need to do? We'll talk about that with Austin. All right, I appreciate y'all as always for coming through for another episode of Locked On Saints and for making me your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go and check out Locked On NFL Draft. Eric Crocker, Ryan Tracy, who made the athletic matrix that we used a bunch today, that we'll continue to use throughout the rest of the offseason. Go and check them out wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. As always, y'all, I appreciate you so much for making me a part of your day, and for everything else you need in between these episodes on your New Orleans Saints. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.